I think that if we tuned in to our inner world, we would find that the way that we have been acting in this dualistic society has been damning, condemning, and totally destructive. Whereas if we would all tune in to cultivating the inner life, there would be a knowing that each of us has something to offer.
Welcome to Religion Unmuted, where we explore what religion sounds like with women's voices turned up. I'm your host, Rachel Schneider, a religion scholar and director of the Religion and Public Life program at Rice University. Today, we're going to be talking about mental health, healing, and spirituality. Our guest today is Juanita Rasmus, an author, speaker, spiritual director, and co-pastor of St. John's United Methodist Church in downtown Houston. In talks, interviews, and her recently published book, Learning to Be, Finding Your Center After the Bottom Falls Out, Pastor Juanita talks openly about her own mental health journey, including periods of exhaustion and depression, as well as a process of discovering deep healing and transformation. Thank you, Pastor Juanita, for joining us today. We are honored to have you.
Rachel, it's a privilege to be here with you today.
Oh, it is our privilege for sure. And I really want to spend some time talking about your recent book, Learning to Be, because it's an incredibly powerful and personal book. And in that book, you're really candid about learning to live with depression and a period in your life that you call the crash. And you also describe how depression became your teacher.
Yes.
And an invitation into knowing a more expansive self.
Yes.
Can you tell our listeners more about this journey?
You know, one of the things I want to say is, first of all, before we get into real depth about this, is to anybody that's listening, that's experiencing a mental health challenge or a diagnosis, I want to say to you, take a deep breath. I want you to know that you can live with the diagnosis. When I came to experience depression, a major depressive episode, the experience was one that was at a time in my life when anybody looking at my life would have said, oh, wow, her life looks great. She's got a great marriage. She has 2 young children. The church where she co-pastors is growing. We started with 9 people. At this point, we had 3,500 members, including Beyonce, and everybody from Beyonce to the beggar on the street was a part of the St. John's community. So when you looked at my life from the outside, it looked great. The problem wasn't on the outside, though. You see, because I was telling myself a story that had propelled the success, or at least was an aspect, if you will, of the success we were experiencing. Both my husband and I were entrepreneurial. We came from entrepreneurial families for generations, right? And so that DNA was in us. Take nothing and make something. That was in us. But what I didn't recognize is that what was also in us, and very much, or I should say in my DNA, was the use of depression as a coping mechanism. I didn't recognize that part of what was happening in my life is that I was living out the narrative of being a good little girl, being a hard worker, make sure something happens. It's in your care, so make something come of this. You have people watching you, right? And so all of that kind of narrative came up and out as a part of my experience of the crash. What was happening for me was not only burnout, because I did not know how to care for myself in that environment. Everything that I thought gave me life was a part of my work, the job I was called to do, right? So here I am addicted to my job. And so what happened for me is that one morning I got up, prepared breakfast for my family, and we always made breakfast a big deal because our family was such a busy one, as many families are who are listening to this today. You know, our girls were in Girl Scouts, and of course I was co-leader of Girl Scouts, all the different activities they were involved in. So I had not only a full professional life, but a full life as a wife and a mom. And that morning after we ate breakfast, my husband said, "Would you like me to take the girls to school?" And I thought, that's a great idea. Absolutely. It'll give me a few minutes to put my makeup on in the bathroom mirror instead of the rear view mirror. I know I'm not alone there. Hello, moms. Yeah. Right? And so I kissed everybody goodbye, saw them out the door, and I went to the bathroom to put on my makeup. And Rachel, I got so sick. I thought, oh my God, maybe I'm getting the flu. I would imagine, looking back, I can't even totally put words to how I felt. It was as though everything in me was collapsing. And so I picked up the phone, I called our secretary, and I told her that I didn't think I could come in. And then before I knew it, I saw myself hitting redial and calling her back and saying, I'm not coming in. I'm going to take a mental health break or a sabbatical or something. I hung up the phone, I got in the bed, and I proceeded to sleep 18 to 20 hours a day for weeks. After about 2 weeks of that, my husband said, "Baby, something's wrong. This isn't just fatigue." And so I went to my primary care physician, had numerous blood tests. She was trying to find what could be going on, right? So she ruled out things like thyroidism, and she ruled out diabetes and other things that can mimic or create the experience of depression. After she ruled out everything she could, she said, "Ms. Rasmus, I think you need to see a psychiatrist." And believe me, for some people, hearing that would be traumatizing. Hearing that for me was a sign of hope, because I had no idea why I couldn't get out of bed, why I was beginning to have what now I know were panic attacks. When the phone would ring at home, I would literally feel like I was dying. It was as though somebody was pushing me off a cliff. And I had no understanding, no comprehension as to what was going on with me. So to see a psychiatrist and to have this person sit with me for an hour and probe and inquire and ask questions and then come up with a solution and say to me, "I believe your diagnosis is a major depressive episode." So that was the beginning of finding out a sense of what was going on, a sense of what could be happening.
And sometimes it's just so important to have words and language to put on something.
Yes. And that's what my psychiatrist gave me. Saying that I had had a major depressive episode, and I got to tell you, and I say this in the book, Learning to Be, I said to her, "Now, have I had a nervous breakdown?" And she said, "Well, there's no such term in the DSM-4, but in my neighborhood, when this kind of thing, which nobody ever discussed what the symptoms were, right? But in my neighborhood, when this kind of thing happened to a person, there were hushed tones. People said, well, you know, she had a nervous breakdown, right? And so for me, I could so relate to that term because it literally felt as though every cell, every nerve in my body was popping.
And I want to ask you, during that time, how did your sense of faith or God change?
That's a great question. I'm really grateful because in the process, something that happened fairly quickly for me was that the Spirit said to me very clearly, take notes. And I had no idea other than to recognize the fact that taking notes for me, I consider myself a consummate student, the lifelong learner, right? So when I heard take notes, now keep in mind what's happened is that I was at home every day by myself. I was seeing my psychiatrist, taking medication every 2 weeks or every week. It began every week I was going to talk therapy with my psychotherapist. And so what's really happening is I have a lot of silence. I have a lot of solitude. And those are the tools that Spirit uses to speak to us. Most of us are so busy doing that we don't create intentional contemplative spaces to listen for the deep knowing of Spirit. And so it was in that silence that when the Spirit said, take notes, I knew that I was in a course to recover, or in reality, to discover my most authentic self. And so for me, that silence and the fact that the Spirit spoke to me so deeply, so clearly about taking notes was an indication that I wasn't alone. And so I did not feel alone, although I recognize there are those who do. And for me, my therapist and my psychiatrist and the Spirit were my partners in this. They were helping me in this journey of self-discovery. I came to realize, and it was many, many, many months, years before I really saw that the crash I experienced was the uprooting, the cracking open, if you will, of my subconscious, so that I could address the beliefs that I had been carrying and believing to be myself. The things I had been thinking about myself that no longer served me, the beliefs, the paradigms that were not life-giving. While they might have comforted me, guided me, offered direction as a child, the idea of being a good little girl does not serve a grown woman who has to make decisions and choices and who has the opportunity to create a life that she would love living.
That is so powerful. And I really love what you said about discovery rather than recovery. That's such an important reframing, I think, of what can be possible through these really defining seasons of our lives.
Yes. You know, the scripture says, unless a grain of wheat falls to the ground and cracks open, it cannot bear fruit. Each of us is going to experience at least one cracking open in our life. Sometimes it's because of divorce. Sometimes it's because of a dream that blows up in our face, or a business that doesn't succeed, because of death and overwhelming grief. It could be a number of ways that we feel the rug pull from under our feet. And it's in those moments that we have to ask ourselves two questions. Number one, who am I? And as Christians or Buddhists or anyone with a faith tradition or anyone without a faith tradition, you also have to say, whose am I? And for me, that big whose am I is I am a child of God. I am a child of the Creator. I am a child of the one whom we call by many names. I am not just some accident. And so we ask ourselves, who am I? And we get to a place where we are able to define ourselves. We are able to understand our identity outside of our titles and the roles we play.
That's beautifully put. And, you know, just personally, when I was reading Learning to Be, I resonated with so much of what you wrote because I grew up in a white evangelical Christian environment that was very rule-based, very much experienced both pressure to achieve as someone who was even recognized as a child as like highly intelligent, but then also to be a good little girl, as you said. And then with that, my own passions, my own desires, my own giftings also were often invalidated in all of this mix. And so it's actually been a really long and ongoing journey for me to claim my own creative power, my giftings as a leader, as well as you write about this performance-addicted perfectionism and all the shoulds and letting that go. So I guess I'm just curious, do you find in your work as a pastor and a spiritual director that these are issues that women with religious backgrounds experience in particular ways? And then, I guess related just from your own story that you spoke about earlier, are there particular costs that Black women bear that we need to be more attentive to?
Yes and yes.
Okay.
So with the first question, and with women who've been raised in spiritual traditions, but also I'll just say it's not just a spiritual tradition. There are many influences, okay? And so a person could be raised without a spiritual tradition and still have these cultural expectations, societal. When I say cultural, I'm thinking more, say, as an African American woman, and then societal as being an American. You pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. Now, nobody said you even had bootstraps, but you're supposed to pull yourself up by them, right? And so, yes, there are often so many dichotomies, so many binary messages. You can be this or that. You can be good or bad. You can be rich or poor. And so, yes, but it's not exclusive, I don't believe, because I've met people who've not been raised in religious traditions, but there was something else that was a voice that spoke limitation and restriction. And the reality is so many of us who've been raised, and particularly in Protestant traditions, have been told that we can bring our tithe and offering, but be quiet. Your voice is not welcome. I grew up most of my life hearing, no woman will stand in this pulpit. And so that caused a real struggle for me as I am sensing this inner knowing that I'm being called to teach in the pulpit. And so, but I won't say that it's limited to just people who've grown up in a faith tradition or the church, the temple, the mosque. I think it's so embedded in our society that women should be silent, that they should not be heard. I think that if we tuned in to our inner world, we would find that the way that we have been acting in this dualistic society has been damning, condemning, and totally destructive. Whereas if we would all tune in to cultivating the inner life, there would be a knowing that each of us has something to offer.
Yeah.
Now, as it relates to Black women, that once again, you add systemic racism and you add the pain, the physical effects of what it means to live in a society that doesn't honor bodies that aren't white. One of the books that I would recommend if you and your audience haven't seen it, it's by Resmaa Menakem, or Resmaa.
Oh, yes.
And it's called Grandmother's Hands. I'm reading it as I'm doing more of my own work around some of the trauma that has not been mine, but is in my DNA. They say that we carry for 7 generations. And the scripture says this, that blessings, that curses last, for 15, I think, generations, and blessings last for 7 generations. What that says is when there is a certain way of thinking, there's going to take time because that thinking is going to create feelings. Those feelings will motivate actions, which create results. It'll take generations for us to correct the woundedness that African American women have experienced in this country.
Yeah.
It'll take generations, but it will also take generations for white-bodied Americans to do their healing work so that we don't continue to perpetuate the kind of wounding that affects us all.
That book, My Grandmother's Hands, was so powerful for me. It's been one of the most transformative books for really grappling with the destructive impact, collective trauma of racism, of white supremacy, how that's impacted me and my body.
Sure.
And I know how it affects Black people and African Americans in their bodies, and just being attuned to that is so important. And I really appreciate your honesty and just like speaking to those realities and how we undo those generational patterns and memories that are in our systems.
That's right. That's right. And the way we do it is we have to begin to notice what we're noticing.
Yeah.
So I have to notice how when there have been times when members of my congregation have had to go to court for whatever reason, right? And I walk into the courthouse and walking through the metal detectors and seeing officers with guns, I immediately feel anxiety.
Yeah.
Now, I have never been in court. I have never been arrested. I've served on a jury before, but that is not my personal experience. But the anxiety that was over the top represented collective experience. And so you can see how when a person is responding and they have an experience and they notice what they notice, man, that seemed really out of proportion for just walking in the courthouse. But when you notice what you notice, you begin to inquire. You begin to ask yourself, what is that really about for me? And then you begin to inquire, is this, what am I believing? What am I believing here? Mm. Am I believing that to be Black is to be proven guilty first? What am I believing here? And so that's why I said that inquiry, we've got to notice what we're noticing and begin to do the work of inquiry.
Absolutely. And even giving yourself permission to trust the messages that your body is sending you.
Oh, absolutely.
To allow yourself to really listen to the wisdom that is in the body.
Yes.
Even if, it's communicating messages of fear, of warning.
Yes.
I think it's just so important to tune into that in our systems. I was really struck by a line in your TED Talk that you gave here in Houston, and you said something like, men are given the power to go on quests and women are given the power to be sick. And I'm hearing you saying that you gave yourself permission to go on a quest, but I'm wondering what you meant by that.
Well, see, the reality is the quest is the opportunity to explore the inner life without interruption in many ways. Okay. So many of us as women are wearing so many hats. So as an example, right now I have a group of young women who are all young professional women in their 30s who all, at least with this particular group, most of them, not all, many of them are wives and mothers, right? So here they are trying to cultivate careers, raise decently healthy human beings, maintain relationships, and they have absolutely no time for a quest, right? The quest is the finding of and naming who I am, what I would absolutely love in the 4 quadrants of my life. We all have these quadrants: health and well-being, time and money freedom, our relationships, and our vocation, how we are showing up to serve our world. And if you have any in your audience who are retired, we don't stop having vocations. We may not get paid for them. All right. We may volunteer our services, but we are all here to serve in some way. I believe we're here to do two things: fall in love with our most expansive self and to give ourselves away in service. Now, when I say that, I don't mean an unhealthy unsetting of boundaries.
Right.
When I say give ourselves away, I mean to allow rather the flow of life to flow through you in the work that's been placed in your hands to do, on your heart to do, in your mind to do.
That's beautiful. I guess I want to ask you a little bit now about how your experience informs how you engage with others as a director, spiritual director, as a pastor, because you are a co-pastor of a very large, predominantly African-American congregation, St. John's United Methodist Church in Houston, that you've co-pastored for many years with your husband, Rudy. And I can personally attest to how powerful of a role St. John's has played in the wider Houston community. I have seen it on the front lines of natural disasters, responding after hurricanes, COVID-19, being a gathering place to mourn and to resist in the wake of racial injustice. And in your book, you talk about St. John's as this place where the broken and bruised show up for healing. And then you also discuss some of the vicarious trauma that can come with pastoral work and witnessing and accompanying people in deep suffering and bearing witness to that. And so I'm curious, what kind of advice would you have for religious leaders or others involved in care work about how to care for themselves and to be open to the lessons that this work might have to teach them?
Oh, that's a great question. And really, you answered it when you said, be open. So number one, be open to the fact that in the midst of your role, you are also engaged in your own inner work. So be engaged. Don't ignore it. I ignored my inner work for 7 years, and that was a part of the experience. I called it the crash, and my psychotherapist, my psychiatrist called it a major depressive episode. But St. John of the Cross, the mystic, would have said it was the dark night of the soul. You know, one of the things I found, there are a few men that I've done spiritual direction with, and one in particular said, I asked them, so what do you do to unwind? What do you do for fun? And this person said, oh, I love fishing. As a matter of fact, recently a woman said the same thing to me. She said, I love fishing. I said, well, when was the last time you went fishing? And each of them looked at me with this kind of glazed over look, one person said, well, I like to go fishing with a certain person and they've been out of the country. The other person said, well, it's been a while. And I'm saying, wait a minute. You're telling me that you absolutely love going fishing, and yet you have allowed yourself to ignore it? And so I'd say to those in leadership, and it doesn't really matter what level of leadership, because you're in leadership when you lead your home, even if it's just you and the plants, right? So when you are looking at your life, look to the things and stay open to the things that you love. Do more of those. Things that are taking life from you, do less of those. Initially, when we got to St. John's, we were at the height of the AIDS epidemic. St. John's was one of the few African-American churches in the city that would eulogize people who had died from complications of HIV and AIDS, right? And so what that meant, Rachel, we did a funeral at least once a week, 50 or more funerals a year for 7 years. After a point, a person has to care for their own grief. I cried at those funerals. Many times I didn't even necessarily know the person. It could have been a family member whose church wouldn't eulogize them. And so St. John's opened their doors to do so, right? And so here I am experiencing trauma and grief every week. And so at a point, I recognize that while I love helping to celebrate the life of a person who has come this way, I could only do that so often. I had to get away from doing funerals because it was so draining. Notice what you're noticing. Notice what gives you life. Do more of it. Notice what takes life from you. Try to do less of it, or at least cultivate a way of care for yourself. So one of the things that we stopped doing was I stopped going to the internment. I would do the funeral and then often ask the family to allow the the funeral home, or either we would assign another pastor on our staff to go to the internment, because that was too much for me. And so after a funeral, we would often go grab some lunch somewhere because I was emotionally starving. And so I'd go eat and then I'd go home. So after a funeral, there was no more Juanita doing anything.
Yeah.
Okay. But that was noticing what I noticed and then caring for myself in a way that I could. And so my message to anyone, notice what you're noticing. What gives you life? What makes you come alive? Do more of it. Put it on your calendar. Make it an appointment, and then honor it the same way you honor any other commitment that you put on your calendar. It is okay to teach people how to treat you. It is okay to say, I'm not available at that time. I can do it on Friday at 6. Or would Monday at 3 be better? Notice what you're
taking notes.
Exactly. Notice what you're noticing. Notice what gives you life. Do more of that. Give yourself permission to care for yourself in the ways that you can.
That's so beautiful. And I think, it reminds me when we were talking earlier about generational trauma, but we don't talk enough about generational wisdom and these deep sources of wisdom and knowledge and insight that are deep within and around us. So I really appreciate your reminder to tune in. And I guess I want to conclude by asking you, what, just on this question of tuning in, where is your imagination coming alive in this moment? I mean, not this literal, it could be about this moment of this podcast, but in this moment in your life, where are you finding your imagination just being stirred?
There are several places. One, as I'm approaching a time of not retire, I am retiring in some ways, but really I'm calling it rewiring. And so my imagination is going to how I will continue to show up and serve with my gifts that I offer of teaching and writing. I'm imagining also in the area of relationships. There are some things I'm very interested in, and I'm wanting to cultivate some relationships with other women particularly who are interested in traveling as women, who are interested in studying together, who are interested in art and appreciation of art, who are interested in making art. I always say you don't have to be a trained artist to experience the creative. And so I'm interested in creating a group of women who come together maybe every 2 months or something, and we paint together, or we do pottery together, or we sew together, whatever. So those are the things I'm imagining right now. And this is a good time for me. Today, I just came back from a 4-day silent retreat.
Wow.
Where I have given myself permission to listen deeply. And so I invite you, you may not be able to take 4 days, but everybody has 4 minutes where they can take a deep breath and breathe in deeply and fully. Why not do it now? Breathe in through your nose deeply and fully, and exhale through your mouth deeply and slowly. 4 minutes where you can give yourself permission to be still.
Thank you for that invitation, Pastor Juanita, and that meditation, and just for sharing your experiences with us, with me, with our listeners. I encourage anyone who's listening to read your book. If something resonated with them, read your books. We could have a whole nother conversation about the Enneagram.
We sure can. Anytime.
Yeah, definitely. And I just want to thank you for having the courage to do that deep discovery work that you've spoken of, and then also having the courage to share it with the world. And it's just such a gift to have you here today and to be in conversation with you.
I have enjoyed being with you and your audience, Rachel. Thank you for thinking of me.
Thank you. That's it for this episode of Religion Unmuted. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to subscribe to, rate, and review us wherever you listen. Follow us on Twitter at RiceRPLP, and thanks to our guest, Pastor Juanita Rasmus. Today's show was written by myself and Haley Hemstreet. Our series is produced by 3 Wire Creative, and we had support from the Henry Luce Foundation and the American Academy of Religion. I'm Rachel Schneider. Until next time.